When I was 13 years old, my local community theater put on a production of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken's classic musical, Little Shop of Horrors. This was my first exposure to the show, and I found myself really enjoying it. The songs captured that doo-wop and Motown 50s and 60s vibe, and it was just so damn funny. And the idea of a mutant plant taking over the world was just weird and crazy enough to work. And then, just as any 13-year-old would do, I promptly forgot about it. A few years had gone by before I finally saw the 1986 film version of Little Shop of Horrors, as I stayed up way past my bedtime one night and watched it on my phone via Netflix. As the film was going, I recognized many of the same jokes and beats from when I'd seen it a few years prior. I laid in bed and stifled laughs as Audrey 2 continued to control Seymour through every twist and turn in the story. As the film reached its climax, Audrey was summoned to the plant, but then... she lived? Wait, that wasn't what happened when I saw it on stage, right? Sure enough, the 1986 film had changed the ending. Luckily for me, around this time, Warner Brothers had just released a new Blu-ray edition with the film's original ending intact, and having loved the rest of the film, I bought it as soon as I could. As I watched the original ending of the film, I was gobsmacked. The effects and the music and the puppetry and the sheer scope of the original ending was mind-boggling to 18-year-old me, and still is to 26-year-old me. Let me be candid for a second. The story of the rise and fall and rise again of Little Shop of Horrors' original ending is one that has fascinated me for years. It's a story I would willingly share with anyone who's willing to listen because of how unique it is in its own sense of tragedy and triumph. The film became a victim of the time and culture in which it was released and couldn't remain fully true to either of its sources, though it deeply yearns to. The 1986 adaptation of Little Shop of Horrors is a cult classic with a compelling history. If you've never heard this story before, strap in, because we're going to discuss quite a bit about the film's history, that original ending, and all of the twists and turns that happened before it was finally released in its full glory to the public. The original production of the stage musical adaptation of Little Shop of Horrors opened at New York City's WPA Theater in 1982. The show was written by Howard Ashman and Alan Menken, who'd only collaborated together on one show by this point, God Bless You, Mr. Rosewater. After their first show underperformed off-Broadway, Ashman told Menken that he wanted to make something fun. Ashman remembered a film he'd seen on TV as a 14-year-old kid in Baltimore, Roger Corman's The Little Shop of Horrors, a low-budget B-movie shot in 2.5 days on leftover sets. Menken, who'd never seen the film before, video recorded a television broadcast after Ashman's initial pitch, and his mind started racing. After about 8 months, the show was written and WPA's production was off the ground. When WPA's production of the show opened, it was an immediate smash, selling out its entire month-long run. Kyle Rennick, the producing director of the WPA, met with potential producers for a move to a bigger theater with an open run. Yearning for a more intimate production that maintained the less glamorous and more seedy feeling evoked in the show, Ashman, Menken, and Rennick went for an off-Broadway run at the Orpheum Theater, produced by the Schubert Organization, record producer David Geffen, and Broadway mega-producer and human trash fire Cameron McIntosh. The off-Broadway run was an incredible success, running from July 1982 to November 1987. Not too long after the show had opened, producer David Geffen had already started looking at optioning a film adaptation of the musical. Geffen, a prolific figure in the record industry, had just started his own film company, finding massive success with the film Risky Business, so the stage was set for his company to produce Little Shop. He reportedly approached both Martin Scorsese, who was working with Geffen on the film After Hours and allegedly wanted to shoot the film in 3D, as well as John Landis, but it was Frank Oz who he ended up pursuing as a primary choice to direct. Frank Oz was fresh off of directing The Muppets Take Manhattan for TriStar Pictures. Oz was, and to this day remains, one of the most famous film and TV figures who could probably go to the supermarket and be unbothered. He's notorious for creating several prominent Muppet characters, including Miss Piggy, Fozzie, and Rolf, and he created the character of Yoda in 1980's Return of the Jedi. Initially, Oz turned down the offer to direct Little Shop, feeling that it was too theatrical for himself to find an in as a film director. A few weeks later, he formed an idea of how to move the three women who narrate the story through the film's various set pieces, and he asked to rearrange and rewrite some of the film's screenplay. Ashman and Menken liked his edits, and Oz signed on. David Geffen seemingly wanted the film to play several of its options pretty safe. First, he wanted stars, or at least names, in the leading roles. His first and only choice for the role of Seymour was Rick Moranis, famous for his comedy work on SCTV and in the smash hit Ghostbusters. The cast of Little Shop of Horrors acts as a sort of who's who of 80s comedy figures. Of course, Steve Martin as the sadistic dentist Orin Scrivillo DDS, and John Candy, Christopher Guest, and Bill Murray all make appearances. Geffen attempted to get a notable star to play the role of Audrey, allegedly looking at Barbra Streisand and even offering the role to Cyndi Lauper. Eventually, Ellen Greene, the originator of the role on stage, won out, and honestly, thank God, because no one plays this role like Ellen. Anyway. In pre-production meetings, Geffen told Frank Oz and Howard Ashman that they would have to adjust the ending of the film, saying that a dark ending wouldn't work with this material for a mainstream audience, citing his initial test screenings for Risky Business, which originally had a darker ending that tested poorly. Oz and Ashman held their ground that the dark ending should stay intact, feeling that it was more authentic to the Faustian nature of the source material. After some back and forth, Geffen allowed the original ending to stay, and production began. Little Shop of Horrors shot in London at Pinewood Studios on the 007 stage. Production lasted a little over 7 months, late October 1985 to early June 1986, which is a pretty long time to shoot a movie. For comparison, the recent Promising Young Woman was shot in 23 days. Hustlers was shot in 29 days. Those films, of course, had smaller budgets and don't have incredibly complex puppets or major musical numbers to deal with, but even if we look at films with a more complex scope, Mamma Mia, Here We Go Again, another big musical, took about 4 months to film, and Avengers Endgame, one of the biggest and most expensive movies of all time, took about 5 months to film. The 7 months to shoot Little Shop doesn't even include all the time and work that Richard Conway put into the original ending, but we'll get to that in a minute. There are varying reports as to how much it cost to make Little Shop of Horrors, ranging from about $18 million all the way up to $38 million. Given the long production schedule, the various stars and cameos, and this, and this, and this, and so much more, it certainly wasn't a cheap film to make. With that, it seems like everyone at least got along really well. It's only 8 minutes of a 7-month shoot, but the blooper reel included on the film's DVD releases indicates an air of legitimate camaraderie among the cast and crew. And honestly, when you're working for that long and you have upwards of 50 people operating a large puppet that has to be shot at a reduced frame rate in order to get all of the syllables in a lip sync correct, one would hope that everyone was at least having some fun. During this lengthy initial shoot, the production team filmed a finale that mirrored the off-Broadway production and, to some extent, the original 1960 film. Audrey 2 lures Audrey 1 into the florist shop. The plant tries to eat Audrey when Seymour rushes in and grabs her. Audrey ends up dying in a back alley, telling Seymour to feed her to the plant so that he can continue to be successful. He does just that. He runs off, ashamed of himself, when he's approached by a marketing executive who wishes to sell Audrey 2s across the country. Seymour realizes that Audrey 2's plan was world domination. Audrey 2 in turn eats Seymour, and the Audrey 2s take over the world in a big 50s B-movie style final sequence. So much of this final sequence, especially the Don't Feed the Plants number, involved a ton of visual effects work from a man named Richard Conway. For the final sequence, he combined miniatures, forced perspective, alternate frame rates, and many other incredibly impressive real-time effects to give off the illusion that Audrey 2 was taking over the world, using scene and shot descriptions from Frank Oz and Howard Ashman, as well as storyboards from artist Mike Ploog. The complex Audrey 2 puppets designed by Lyle Conway, no relation, also made a few appearances in the original finale. Richard Conway and his team worked for roughly a year to create the miniature sets in varying sizes of Audrey 2s. Whereas the Lyle Conway created Audrey 2s were mainly controlled by cables, the miniaturized Richard Conway versions utilized hydraulic and electronic controlled systems. This change in systems was to help accommodate the rapid frame rates used to film the finale, with shots ranging from 48 frames per second all the way up to 360 frames per second. There are many elements of Richard Conway's work on the Don't Feed the Plants number that are incredibly impressive from a production standpoint, and if you're interested in the finale's use of miniatures and practical effects, I highly recommend checking out the article compiled over at monsterlegacy.net that utilizes several sources to present an incredibly comprehensive behind-the-scenes look at the final sequence. I'll link it below. Once again, the overall budget is hard to pin down, but estimates put the original ending of Little Shop of Horrors in the $5 million range. To put in perspective, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which was released the exact same year, reportedly had $5 million for its entire budget. Platoon, released the exact same day as Little Shop of Horrors and the eventual Best Picture winner of 1986, cost a total of $6 million. Filming wrapped on June 5, 1986, and post-production began. A cut of the film was put together after a couple months of work, and the studio, with Frank Oz and a few others in tow, decided to set up a test screening of their film. It didn't go well. So first, for those who are uninitiated, let me go ahead and define what a test screening entails. Basically, during the editing stage, a studio may decide to show a movie to an audience in order to receive feedback and try to gauge whether or not a film will be successful and/or what changes should be made before a film is released. Many times when test screenings occur, an audience won't know what they're seeing before the screening starts. The studio will simply round up a general demographic, show the movie in its current state, telling the audience beforehand if any effects or scoring are yet to be put in. At the end of the screening, the audience will be polled about their experience watching the film, with the most important question being whether or not the viewer would recommend the film to someone else, with the studio hoping to win over at least half of the audience. Little Shop of Horrors held its first test screening in San Jose, California. A line in a 1987 issue of the magazine Cinefantastique claims it was a quote-unquote family-oriented audience. During a Q&A at a screening of Little Shop at the 92nd Street Y, Howard Ashman insinuated that the audience was mostly teenagers. According to Frank Oz's recollection of the screening, most of the night went extremely well. People applauded after musical numbers, and the audience was extremely engaged throughout. And then Audrey died. And then Seymour died.
Everything was wonderful until we killed Ellen's character and Rick's character, and then it was an icebox. It was a disaster, a total disaster.
When the dust had settled and the audience surveys were collected, the team found out that a mere 13% of the audience said that they would recommend the film.
This is the worst picture ever made.
I liked it.
Desperate for another try, Frank Oz asked David Geffen to set up another test screening, this time in Los Angeles. However, the results were just about the same, with the audience score only bumping up ever so slightly. Frank Oz cites these screenings as a key moment in his recognition of the differences between stage and screen.
In theater, they were killed, and then they came out for a bow. Here, they were killed. They didn't come out for a bow. So
it's also worth noting that the 80s were one of the first periods in which audiences experienced true sequel fever. With highly successful franchises like Star Wars, Indiana Jones, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Rocky, Back to the Future, and others all hitting theaters, sequels became somewhat expected for certain types of films. In order to have a sequel, a film has to end in a way that sets up for it. The original ending of Little Shop is finite. There's no getting around that. And given the rest of the film's content and how compelling all of the characters are, it would make sense in a casual viewer's eyes, especially at the time, that a continuation could be possible. David Geffen basically said as much as they were gearing up for reshoots. So yes, I think that part of the reason a new ending was shot is because Geffen wanted the possibility of turning Little Shop into a franchise on the table. In any case, with 2 disastrous test screenings behind them and with mere months before the scheduled release date, the team had to rush to think of a new ending to the film. In September 1986, 3 months before release, Frank Oz and various members of the production team reassembled to film a new ending to Little Shop of Horrors. The reshoots cost a hefty $2 million, which makes sense given that, they destroyed the set the first time around. Rick Moranis and Ellen Greene returned. Paul Dooley's bit part was rewritten with James Belushi taking over the role, and Tisha Campbell was unavailable for reshoots, so she was replaced with a body double during the film's final moments. Reshoots took 2 weeks, reshooting the scene where Seymour asks Audrey to marry him, the scene in the back alley after Audrey 2 tries to kill Audrey 1, the scene where a marketing executive tries to buy the Audrey 2 off of Seymour. They shot a new scene that mirrors Audrey's fantasy from Somewhere That's Green, and they reshot bits and pieces of Mean Green Mother from Outer Space. The original shoot of Mean Green Mother took 5 weeks to film, so the final cut of the number is a solid mix of new and old footage. Following the reshoots, Geffen and Oz set up one more test screening with the new ending, and the recommendation score shot up to around 70%. With that, the new ending stayed, and the original ending was discarded. And to be clear, the ending being reshot was not an instance of a studio trying to distract the public from a costly mistake. Well, at least at this point. The original ending and the reshoots were covered by several publications including New York Magazine, Cinefix, and Cinefantastique. For those who kept up with movie news, it was relatively well known and well documented that all of this was going on. Little Shop of Horrors was finally released in theaters on December 19, 1986 in 866 theaters. The film generally received a positive critical reception. Janet Maslin of the New York Times said that, quote, "The musical dubbing is at times awkward, but its best moments are delightful enough to make the slow stretches unimportant," unquote. She also praised the film's quote-unquote right mixture of playfulness, tunefulness, and bloodlust, as well as Frank Oz's quote-unquote three-dimensional direction. Roger Ebert praised the film and loudly proclaimed that it would be the next Rocky Horror Picture Show, predicting a future of midnight showings with a cult audience. In an otherwise positive review, Paul Attanasio of the Washington Post felt that the film's ending was its worst flaw, pointing out that it looked and felt reshot and, quote, "It's over before it started. A dud," unquote. The box office performance was fair, raking in $39 million in the US. Given its extensive budget, though, the studio considered it an underperformer. When Oscar season rolled around, the film was nominated for 2 awards, one for Best Visual Effects and another for Best Original Song for Mean Green Mother from Outer Space. Fun fact, this was the first song with profanity that was nominated for Best Original Song, and it marked the first of Ashman and Menken's 7 Best Original Song nominations in just 6 years. However, the cards wouldn't fall in Little Shop's favor at the Oscars, with Best Visual Effects going to Aliens, one of the year's top box office hits, and Best Original Song going to Take My Breath Away from Top Gun, a Billboard #1 hit from the highest-grossing film of 1986. The story of Little Shop of Horrors could have easily ended here, as many films do. However, as everyone involved in Little Shop moved on to new projects, curiosity still loomed in the air for many dedicated fans. Little Shop of Horrors was released on home video in 1987, and through its release on video as well as showings on TV, it gained a bit of a cult following. This seems to be a theme for this channel. Because of the nature of mainstream home video in the 80s and 90s, it was rare for things like deleted scenes and/or alternate takes to be made available to the public. Occasionally, Laserdisc releases would include audio commentaries or some exclusive content, but Laserdisc was incredibly expensive and was considered more of a niche format catered more to cinephiles and deep-pocketed collectors, especially in the United States. However, in March 1997, a new format would shake up the home video industry. One could even say that this new format hit the industry like a twister. On March 24, 1997, the hit 1996 film Twister became the first widely available DVD release in the US. The film was released by Warner Brothers, who went all in on the new format from the jump, releasing about 15 additional movies on DVD immediately following Twister's release. DVD was being pushed as a more viable home media option than both VHS and Laserdisc, given that its digital output allowed for clearer picture and sound quality, as well as the ability to create interactive menus that allowed for easy access to additional language and subtitle options, scene selection, and it opened up the possibility of bonus features. Also, DVD's small size, the same size as the incredibly popular compact disc, meant that equipment could be less bulky and potentially less expensive than its predecessors. Warner Brothers was the first major studio to commit to releasing its catalog, both old and new, on DVD. MGM UA, Columbia TriStar, and Universal were following along to varying degrees by the end of 1987, but Warner's initial DVD output was unprecedented. Some early DVDs used the new advantages incredibly well. For example, The Mask had a relatively substantial list of bonuses for an early release. There's Jim Carrey really excited about those interactive menus. Most early DVDs were pretty bare though, lots of theatrical trailers and production notes. In any case, Warner Brothers was extremely dedicated to DVD and made sure that new consumers had noteworthy titles to choose from and reasons to upgrade their pre-existing collections. Well, guess who owns the distribution rights to Little Shop of Horrors? By this point, the original ending of Little Shop was a thing of legend, something that seemingly had to exist but that almost nobody had seen. Given this, Warner Brothers contacted director Frank Oz to see if he had the original ending. He did! Technically. Frank Oz had a VHS copy of the original ending created from a black and white duplicate of one of the film's rough cuts. Because it was a version of the ending used in the midst of editing, many sound cues were missing, some scenes weren't scored, some of the editing is suspect. Oh, and it doesn't look good. Like, it's certainly not unwatchable, but it's a far cry from what Frank and his team had set out to make. However, it existed, and as far as Frank Oz knew, his copy was all that was left. Keep in mind, during the days before DVD, if material wasn't used in a final cut, most of the time it was simply thrown out. Little Shop of Horrors received a special edition DVD release on January 27, 1998. The release was one of the most stacked early DVD releases. Beyond the theatrical cut of the film, the DVD included, of course, the aforementioned work print of the original ending, a blooper reel, a 23-minute TV special about the making of the film, a couple of trailers, and optional audio commentary from Frank Oz on the feature, the original ending, and the blooper reel. It was recalled about a week after its release. A couple sources say 5 days. The original DVD of Little Shop of Horrors, in turn, became the first collector's item on the DVD market. Producer David Geffen was the one who made the move to have it pulled off the shelves. Of course I objected, David Geffen told Entertainment Weekly in 1998. It looked like shit. Geffen allegedly called Frank Oz to question why he'd given Warner Brothers that copy of the ending, and told Oz that he had a color copy of the ending and insinuated that he'd been toying with the idea of doing a theatrical re-release with the original ending intact. With that, the 1998 DVD stayed put away as fans eagerly awaited a full-scale release with the original ending. Time passed, and then it passed some more, and then it continued to pass. It turned out that David Geffen didn't possess the color copy of the ending that he'd claimed to have. Eventually, on May 23, 2000, the film was reissued on DVD. It carried all of the previous DVD's features save for the original ending. No theatrical re-release, no color copy, no Audrey 2 takeover fantasy. Just as the ending itself became a thing of legend, the original DVD release became a sort of legend itself. Given that the original DVD came out during the format's infancy, it was a rare find, selling for hundreds of dollars on sites like eBay. This, in many ways, only heightened fan outcry for the original ending to be properly released. It did exist, there was proof that it existed. Even if it was in black and white, it was unfinished and it was taken from a videotape. It existed. However, the ending would once again remain a legend in film circles, and its fate remained a question for many, many years. On February 19, 2008, tech company Toshiba announced that they would end production on their newest home media venture, HD DVD. With this decision, Blu-ray disc won the high-definition format war, and all of the major Hollywood studios committed to releasing their films on the new format. With most of the history of home media being a bit cyclical, studios began re-releasing some of their most treasured films in high definition with the hopes that consumers would, once again, upgrade their collections. Arguably more than any other studio, Warner Brothers put a lot of effort into restoring their catalog and delivering top-notch, high-quality restorations of classic films. Given the fact that Warner handles distribution for not only its own library, but the majority of the classic MGM and RKO libraries, they had a lot to work with. Some of these films received major re-releases complete with giant box sets filled with memorabilia, bonus features, and reproductions of production artifacts. Among these were The Wizard of Oz, Casablanca, Ben-Hur, Citizen Kane, and Singin' in the Rain. A tier below that, Warner offered a line of Blu-ray digibooks, where classic films would be presented with new restorations alongside collectible packaging that included a book of production notes, cast bios, and more. Films included in this lineup included both the 1954 and the 1976 A Star is Born, The Matrix, The Shawshank Redemption, King Kong, and The Color Purple. On top of this, Warner Brothers also reissued some of their classic titles on Blu-ray in affordable standard editions, many of which included at least minor restorations, including Dog Day Afternoon, An American in Paris, 2001: A Space Odyssey, The Music Man, and Network. Warner Brothers showed a deep dedication in presenting their back catalog as best as they could. The stage had been set for Little Shop of Horrors, at this point a certified cult classic with a wide-ranging fan base, to receive a new high-definition release. At this point, the negatives of the original ending of Little Shop of Horrors were still thought to be lost, with Frank Oz basically resigning to the idea that it would never be seen. But not all hope was lost. In 2011, about 25 years after the initial release of Little Shop of Horrors, Warner Brothers finally gave the green light to a full-blown search and rescue project of the film's original ending that would result in a full-blown restoration. The project was led by noted post-production expert Kurt Galvao, who's known for overlooking the restorations of the extended and/or director-approved cuts of films like Superman 2, Woodstock, and his award-winning work on the 2007 restoration of Blade Runner. Galvao, with a team of 12, searched various storage facilities in Los Angeles, London, and Kansas to find the various film and audio reels that had the original footage. The team spent a year and a half painstakingly trying to recreate Frank Oz's vision of the original finale, utilizing the VHS work print that had appeared on the '98 DVD as a guide, as well as various scripts and director's notes that were found. As the team found the various scenes, shots, and audio recordings, they rebuilt the final 23 minutes of the film piece by piece. This included refiltering some of the audio recordings, notably the scene of Audrey's death, which had a loud banging sound in the background when the team found it. Some of the scenes included in the Don't Feed the Plants sequence proved incredibly hard to find, including the shot of Audrey 2 bursting through a marquee for Jason and the Argonauts, and Audrey 2 interrupting a night at the disco. Furthermore, the negatives and recordings that were found were missing the sound effects and scoring one would expect in a film's final cut, so the restoration team had to build many of these sounds from scratch as well as repeating score from earlier in the film, seeking to create a soundtrack that felt authentic to how the film would have been in 1986. When the project was finished, Galvao presented the newly restored ending to Frank Oz, who reportedly had no notes. The newly restored cut of Little Shop of Horrors was announced in June 2012, with a new Blu-ray digibook released to hit stores on October 9th, 2012. The new restoration of the film premiered at the New York Film Festival, where it was met with an incredibly positive reception, and the following Blu-ray release received rave reviews. The film's original ending had finally been presented in its full glory to everyone who wished to see it, and the legend of its existence had come to a close. Or had it? I want to start this section by stressing that the work done for the 2012 restoration of Little Shop is truly excellent, and the fact that it exists is a miracle in itself. As restoration supervisor Kurt Galvao stated in an interview in 2012, lots of times, unfinished work was dumped, especially back then. Nowadays, we don't dump anything. The fact that Galvao and his team found and worked with the necessary resources to recreate the ending of the film in any capacity deserves an astounding amount of praise. As the rest of this essay has suggested, what we ended up with very well could have never existed. Now, if I've learned anything during the research of this essay, it's how little involvement people who were major forces in the creation of the film may have with its subsequent home video releases. There's, of course, David Geffen only learning about the workprint of the film's original ending being on the DVD after it was already released. And then, even with the 2012 restoration receiving the subtitle The Director's Cut, Frank Oz had virtually no involvement with the project. He simply signed off on it when it was finished. In an interview in 2017, Frank Oz said the restoration was, quote, like a Christmas present. I got a call from somebody when I'm next in LA to take a look at what Galvao did. I really had absolutely nothing to do with this, unquote. Oz was so out of the loop that he claimed in an interview with Entertainment Weekly that no color version of the film existed less than a month before the Blu-ray was announced. Either Frank Oz was under the most high-stakes non-disclosure agreement ever created, or he really had no clue what was happening. I couldn't even find any statements from David Geffen about the 2012 restoration. Does he know that this happened? Does he know this exists? What I'm getting at is that, while the ending itself was restored and integrated into the movie, the rest of the movie up to the point where Audrey 2 traps Audrey 1 remains untouched. In the months following the film's Blu-ray release, video taken from a VHS of a color workprint of the film surfaced on the internet. The videos included alternate takes and lines, a darker take on the dentist and Mr. Mushnick's deaths, an extended sequence for the song The Meek Shall Inherit, and a modified, abridged version of Don't Feed the Plants. Some have claimed that this version of the film was the one shown at the test screenings in San Jose and Los Angeles, but I can't find anything to back those claims up. Plus, Frank Oz has claimed that The Meek Shall Inherit was cut before the test screenings. These scenes are worth noting, though, as many of them foreshadow the film's original, darker ending. As the director's cut stands now, it's fantastic and mind-blowing, and it showcases an extremely fantastic level of special effects genius, but it also clashes a bit with the tone of the rest of the film. However, the theatrical ending of the film feels ingenuine and wipes Seymour clean of any consequences, even though he's directly responsible for the deaths of 2 people, including the person who gave him a home. However, Seymour's apparent hesitancy towards just about any harmful action in the film and his distaste for the sudden spotlight makes him a sympathetic character to the audience, and especially in the hands of darling angel Rick Moranis, it's hard to not root for him. And it's hard to see Audrey suddenly become a victim of other people's actions when Ellen Green's performance makes you fall in love with her. And Frank Oz's careful direction paints Audrey and Seymour as a perfect match, to a point that them not ending up together would be devastating. But given the plan's otherworldly nature, it's difficult to make any destruction of it seem believable. Like, this live wire death feels a bit phoned in to me. But even if the darker ending had been foreshadowed, so much of the humor in the bulk of the film feels more tongue-in-cheek than fully dark, and this ending is dark. But the movie's arrangement of Don't Feed the Plants is so good, holy shit. Look, I'm not going to sit here and say that the 2012 cut of Little Shop of Horrors is the definitive cut. It's a great cut. It's a cut that many have thought could never have existed. It is the cut that I've watched to the point that any time I see Audrey and Seymour live, it feels wrong. But it's one where the editing and restoration were focused on a part rather than the whole. However, there's a part of me that feels that even a fully realized restoration that reconstructed the film and or reintegrated new scenes entirely would draw some level of questioning or ire from people here and there. Like, as much as I love Little Shop of Horrors, I don't know that there's a way to make an ending for the film work with 100% satisfaction, given how likable and charming the film makes Audrey and Seymour because of how likable and charming Rick Moranis and Ellen Greene are. Plus, I don't know, it's kind of fun to keep the legend of the film alive. There's a level of delight in the speculation around what Little Shop of Horrors was quote-unquote supposed to be. There's so much fun in seeing videotape copies of alternate takes and extended scenes and different cuts of musical numbers that didn't make it past the editing room. There's a level of fun in not knowing for sure which cut of the film was shown at the test screenings. There's a level of fun in talking to people who grew up watching the theatrical cut and had no idea that an entirely different ending existed. Part of what I think keeps the film's legacy alive is the fact that there are so many different ways in which the film has and continues to exist. Yes, the editing process of a film is deeply complicated and alternate takes and scenes are switched out all the time, but given the pre-existing legend of Little Shop's original ending, any extra footage that suddenly appears feels like an extra piece to a fascinating, never-ending puzzle, and I personally really love that. Is it possible that Warner Brothers will commission another lengthy restoration of the film? Maybe. I don't know. Probably not. Frank Oz seems pretty pleased with what already exists, and, he's already established himself as an absolute legend and doesn't really owe another cut of Little Shop to anyone. He's 77, he's allowed to just chill out and pop up here and there for an interview or a bit role if he wants. Speaking of, did anyone else gasp in the theater when he suddenly appeared in Knives Out? No? Just me? Okay. My point is that Little Shop of Horrors, at this point, is more than just a simple movie musical. It's a piece of storied film history. The behind-the-scenes history of the film's original ending, for me, ultimately adds to my enjoyment of the film. A film which is, of course, truly fantastic and special on its own. It carries such wonderful performances from its entire cast. The music is also just amazing, really cementing how perfect of a team Howard Ashman and Alan Menken were together. It's funny, it's witty, it's silly in a way that retains its absolute charm, and that's a puppet. Not just one puppet, but several. And there were 50 people operating the Audrey 2 puppet during Mean Green Mother from Outer Space, which is just mind-boggling to me. For me, experiencing Little Shop of Horrors is more than just watching whatever would be the quote-unquote perfect cut of the film. Experiencing Little Shop of Horrors is the combination of the knowledge of its chaotic history with what is, in the end, a genuinely fantastic film, made with a great and incredibly clear amount of love. In March 2020, a couple weeks before quarantine started, one of my last movie theater experiences was a screening of a 35mm print of Little Shop of Horrors presented by a queer film group. The screening had many longtime fans in attendance. We were treated to a Rocky Horror-esque shadow cast with local drag queens playing the roles of the two Audreys, and the audience interacted with the film here and there. It was easily one of the most thrilling nights of my life so far. As the film started nearing its climax, I heard someone behind me boo at the screen, which drew a few chuckles, including my own. A few minutes later, as Audrey 2 and Seymour were going at it to Mean Green Mother from Outer Space, I heard someone in the row in front of me who'd never seen the film before tell their friend, "This is the greatest film I've ever seen." Parts of me relate to both of these patrons. Yes, Audrey and Seymour continuing to live goes against the intentions of the piece and its Faustian roots, and it also represents this battle between mainstream consumption and artistic integrity. But also, that's still Little Shop of Horrors on the screen. That's still a murderous plant singing a 60s-style rock song about world domination. And we live in a world where the original ending is easily accessible, so rock on, commercially acceptable version of Little Shop. I still don't love you, but it could always be worse. I'm certainly not the first person to write about the saga of Little Shop of Horrors, and I'm certain I won't be the last. Many have dissected and or reacted to the ways the original ending does or does not work, and many have enjoyed sharing the production's lore over the years. In many ways, This is one of my favorite Hollywood stories, if not my absolute favorite. It not only represents the ways in which film operates separately from theater, an operation that is mostly recognized in the final cut of the film, but it also represents the ways in which cultural tastes and desires change, the absolute importance and necessity of film preservation and restoration, and it's a humbling story of how one can work incredibly hard on something that they're really passionate about, lose a few battles, but eventually win the war. The history of Little Shop's original ending is one mean green mother of a story, and she's great.